Okay, so good morning everyone, so today we're going to carry on with the Madhupindika Sutta, the Honey Cake Sutta, very profound in many ways, and so we'll see what happens when we use this. And the idea here is to understand a bit more about the nature of perception, and when you understand the nature of something, then you can deal with it more skillfully, how to develop it in the right way, how to avoid the bad manifestations of perception, how to develop the good ones. This is kind of the idea behind this. So yesterday we had a look at this passage, which is in some ways a bit hard to understand. So I'm going to read out this passage one more time, and then we will discuss it, not in too much detail, but fairly briefly, just to get the main idea, what actually lies behind this. So the Buddha was saying, after he was asked about the meaning of his initial statement to Dandapani, he was asked by the monks, what does this mean? And then he replied the following. Mendicants, judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies to desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, the desire to be reborn, and ignorance. This is the end of taking up the rod and the sword, the end of quarrels, arguments, disputes, accusations, divisive speech, and lies. This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. So it is, you can see here that this is about making the end of everything. Basically, it's about becoming an arahant, because if you end the underlying tendencies, the anusayas of ignorance and these other things, then that is what arahantship is. So if we practice this properly, if we understand what is going on here, then arahantship actually arises out of that. So what is this pointing to? We have, first of all, we have the idea of judgment driven by proliferating perceptions. And this expression in English is, the Pali expression is papancha sanya sanka, is the Pali word behind this. And it's not a very easy thing to translate at all. And even these days, people are kind of struggling with getting it right. But the main idea here is the idea of papancha. Papancha is the word which really kind of matters the most. And sanya is just perception. And sanka is something like a calculation, or he has judgment here, or something like that. Judging, calculating. Something in that ballpark. So what does proliferation mean? This is kind of the critical word here. Proliferation besets a person. Now the word in English, the word proliferation usually refers to a plant. A plant proliferates. It means that it kind of spreads out in all directions. The root moves this way and it proliferates through a large area. This is the idea for plant. And so if you think of that way, plants in that way, then the idea of proliferating of thought is similar to that. It's the idea of spreading out, being diffuse, just kind of going on in all directions, often kind of at random. The way a plant proliferates is not systematic, it's organic, it kind of wherever it can kind of get a grip in the soil or whatever, it will go. And then when it meets a rock, it will go in a different direction. It's kind of it's not a very structured kind of process. And this is the idea of proliferating, is this idea of the mind kind of moving around, going in different direction, expanding almost forever. Going on and on and on. And when you see that this is what's happening in your mind, the mind you cannot stop the thinking process, yeah? Why can't you stop the thinking process? Well, this is papancha most of the time. Not 100% of the time. If it is a structured thought based on Dhamma, it is not papancha. But most of the time, it is kind of this proliferating tendency of the mind. This is what is meant. So it's kind of useful to understand this, right? Once you understand what lies behind this, it's very useful because it helps us to overcome this tendency of the mind to just move endlessly in various directions. So this is the proliferating tendency, and this is felt in perception, but also in this idea of judgment, or notion is another way of thinking about this. Sankhya is like a notion or concept. And so the mind moves about in notions, ideas, and also in perceptions, and then creates all of these problems out of that. So that is the root idea behind this. And then it talks about the source. What is the source for this? The source from which these arise, the source that gives rise to papancha. Why do we have papancha? What is the source of papancha? And the answer is very simple, and the answer, of course, is the sense of self. That is really the source of papancha. Sometimes you can say the source of papancha is the craving, conceits, and views. This is how the commentaries describes this, because craving, conceits, and views, but craving, conceits, and views are all derived from the sense of self. So the sense of the self is really the root problem in all of this. I was asked yesterday about this usual statement that you often find in the suttas about this is mine, this I am this is myself, yeah, and this is mine, that's tanha, that's craving, yeah? I am this, that's conceit, yeah, and this is myself, well, that's the view. So you can see those three ideas directly in the suttas. The way they are expressed. And so these are all driven by the sense of self. That is the root problem in all of this. It becomes kind of obvious when you start to see this. And so it says here, if there's nothing approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in that source, in other words, if you don't approve of the sense of self, if you don't attach to the sense of self, in other words, you give up the sense of self, that's really the point here. If you give up that sense of self, then just that, because it is the source of proliferation, it ends the proliferation of the mind, but it also ends all of these other things. All the underlying tendencies also get uprooted. So the underlying tendency to desire, raga, repulsion, this is patiga, views, ditthi, doubt, vicikicca, conceit, mana, desire to be reborn, is bhava here, and ignorance, avijja. All of the underlying tendencies are uprooted. And of course, once you uproot all the underlying tendencies, then all the bad, unwholesome qualities, the arguments and the problems and everything is overcome. And that was specifically made, that point, because of Dandapani's rather provocative way of being. So this is what the Buddha says, and it's kind of a little bit difficult to understand, so the monks are still a little bit befuddled by this. And so then the sutta goes on, and the explanation that comes later on now is also very useful, because it expands on this, so you can actually understand the process through which these papancha arises. And when you understand the process, then we can start to do something about it. Then we can start to, to kind of put our mind to the right kind of development, the right kind of reflection, so as to overcome the issue, the problem at hand. This is what the Buddha said when he had spoken. The Holy One, this is the Sugato, got up from his seat and entered his dwelling here. Soon after the Buddha left, those mendicants considered. The Buddha gave this brief passage for recitation. This is the Udesa recitation. Then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. Who can explain the detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. Then those mendicants thought, this Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions. He is capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. Let's go to him and ask him about this matter. Then those mendicants went to Venerable Mahakachana, exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to one side. They told him what had happened and said, "May Venerable Mahakachana please explain this?" And he replies, "Reverence, suppose there was a person in need of heartwood, and while wandering in search of heartwood, he would come across a large tree standing with heartwood. But he'd pass over the root and trunk, imagining that the heartwood should be sought in the branches and the leaves. Such is the consequence for the venerables. Though you were face to face with the Buddha, face to face with the heartwood, you overlooked him, imagining that you should ask me, the leaves and the branches, about these matters. For he is the Buddha, the one who knows and sees. He is vision, he is knowledge, he is manifestation of principle. He is the manifestation of divinity, Brahma Bhutto, Dhamma Bhutto, Brahma Bhutto. He is the teacher, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, the bestower of the freedom from death, the Lord of truth, the realized one. It was the time to approach the Buddha and ask about this matter. You should have remembered it in line with the Buddha's answer. So this is a nice little passage there. And, the monks, these are some of the most famous monks at the time of the Buddha, Mahakachana. But of course, they always really say that the Buddha is the one you should ask and not anyone else. And you have this nice kind of series of epithets there for the Buddha, the way the Buddha is described. He is vision, he is knowledge. It's like this is what the Buddha has become. He is not really, this is kind of what it means psychologically to be a Buddha. You are that knowledge, you are that vision. You are the manifestation of principles, Dhamma Bhutto. You have become the Dhamma, quite literally. Bhutta means become. And so you become the Dhamma. So when you see the Buddha, what you see is like Dhamma, really. That's what the Buddha is. He manifests all the principles of Dhamma. And then Brahma Buddha, he's become divine. He's become Brahma. And here, of course, Brahma does not mean Brahma in the sense of the Brahmanical religion. It doesn't mean Brahma in the sense of the consciousness at the root of existence, or Brahma as a god or anything like that. Here, Brahma means Brahma as the highest kind of principle, the highest qualities, in the sense of the Brahma Viharas having been developed fully, and these kind of things. So you become divine. It's a nice way of putting it. If anyone is divine, it is the Buddha more so than the Devas. The Buddha is more divine than the Devas. The Buddha is more divine than the divinities. The Buddha is more divine than Brahma, because he has gone beyond all of those things. So I think that's a reasonable way of putting it, although it's a little bit sort of mystical perhaps. He is the teacher, he is the proclaimer, etc. He is the giver of the deathless, the amata. Amata means freedom from death. When you say the deathless, it can be misunderstood. It means freedom from death rather than some state. The Lord of truth, the realized one. He is the one you should have asked about this matter. Okay, so, and then the monks reply, certainly the Buddha is all of these things, and we should have remembered it in accordance with his teachings. Still, Mahakachana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by the sensible spiritual companions. You are capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. Please, please, please explain, if it is no trouble now. Well then, reverends, listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. Yes, Reverend, they replied, and Venerable Mahakachana said this. Reverends, the Buddha gave this brief passage for recitation and then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies. This is the end of taking up the rod and sword, etc. This is where these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. And this is how I understand the detailed meaning of this passage for recitation. I consciousness arises dependent on the I and sights. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with respect to sights known by the eye in the past, future, and present. So this is the basic idea. This gives you the sense for how this works. And you will know this is a kind of the general perceptual process. It should not be confused with dependent origination. This is not dependent origination. It is part of dependent origination. It belongs within dependent origination. But dependent origination is more than this. This is like just a sub-factor of dependent origination. And as a sub-factor, it's useful to understand because you understand the broader principle of paticca samuppada if you understand how perceptions are formed, if you like, or are biased or distorted through this kind of process. So, eye consciousness, arises in dependence of eye and sight. You have the eye, you see something, you see a flower, you see a nice shrine, and then when those things come together, there's eye consciousness. Eye consciousness is what makes it possible to know anything. And the coming of together of the three, tinnang sangati, coming together of the three, that is called contact. And remember, contact is just experience. It's the beginning of experience. So when I look there, the moment I see that, that one, the eye, consciousness arises. At that moment, I experience this tray of flowers over here. That is the experience I have. And as long as I keep on looking at it, that experience continues. But the moment I look away, that experience comes to an end. The contact is finished. And then I look back again. So it's a very simple idea. And everything we experience through the six senses that works in this way. The object, the sense, and then consciousness, and then the experience happens as a consequence. But when we experience things, everything we experience, there's always a feeling connected with that. Either we like it, we approve of it, it's a good feeling. We don't like it, it's a bad feeling, dukkha, or it is somewhere in between. It's neither painful nor happy. It's the three kinds of feeling. But there's always a relationship to things in the world. And this is a very meaningful relationship because it is, again, feeling which gives meaning to everything. Nothing has meaning without those feelings. This is how values arise. We value things because of the feeling it gives rise to. And our lives are driven by these things. And then the Buddha says, when you feel what you feel, you perceive. There's a perception also coming with that. There is a decision about, there's a kind of a way of understanding this. So the perception, when I see that, feeling can be understood as part of perception, but feeling is usually singled out because of its importance. But there's also a broader perception. For example, first perception, colors. Second perception, actually flowers, not just colors, flowers. They're sitting in a tray, they're sitting on a shrine, they're part of this room, this meditation center. We are in Sri Lanka. All of these things are perceptions, starting with this tray. But then you start thinking about this tray. So from that perception comes thinking. And when you think about it, that is when this is where proliferation gets a possibility of establishing itself. So you start thinking about this tray. This is what I'm doing now. It's a mixture of perception and thinking. Okay, you perceive this way. It is flowers, all of these kind of things. And then proliferation has a tendency to come in. So for example, if I look at these glasses, I will think, my glasses. And because they are my glasses, I can proliferate about them. Oh no, they are damaged. Look, there's a scratch in the glass. They are not cleaned. Someone hasn't cleaned them properly. We have a lady in Perth. She originally from Vietnam, and she gave Ajahn Brahm his glasses. They kind of paid for the glasses of Ajahn Brahm, I think. And then every time she comes to the monastery, she takes the glasses from Ajahn Brahm and she cleans them up and she puts them back on again. Actually, she doesn't put them back on again, but she gives them back to Ajahn Brahm. It's kind of very, very sweet. So Ajahn Brahm's glasses are always very dirty. I don't know how he can see through those glasses, but anyway, I guess he sees something. So soon as they are your glasses, so Ajahn Brahm doesn't have any attachment to his glasses. He thinks, okay, scratched, dirty, whatever, it doesn't matter. But this lady, she cleans it up. So my glasses, once something is yours, you start thinking about it, proliferating about it. Someone might steal them. I better take them to the Dhamma hall. If I leave them in the room, maybe someone will steal my glasses, right? Or that sort of thing, You proliferate about it because it is yours. So this is one of the ways in which proliferation happens because of tanha, craving, mine. These things are me. So this is one thing. And then maybe you look at these things and maybe you think that, well, actually, you have a view about these flowers, I don't know what kind of view you can have, but maybe you want them to last forever or something like that, and you're hoping they will not be impermanent, You have, actually, that's a bit of a silly view to have about flowers, to hope they will last forever, But you have views about things in the world. The most important views are the views of eternalism and annihilationism. These are the most foundational views we have. And so you have views about these things, especially in regard to yourself. So whenever you perceive something, you tend to have views about it. So you perceive your will, you perceive your perceptions, you perceive your own awareness, and then you have a view that this will last forever or not. So you have views about it. And then you have conceit. Conceit here again is also this relationship between you and the khandhas. This is me, I am not this, I am that, or whatever, and these sort of things. The three kinds of, what are they called again now? The three kinds of obsession, I think is a translation. The obsession, craving, conceit, and views. And these are the things, because they relate to the sense of self. All of these things relate to the sense of self. This is where proliferation happens, where we think endlessly about things. It goes on and on and on. And this is what this process here describes. So why does this happen? And the reason why it happens is because when we contact the world, when we experience the world, one of the things that we do when we experience the world, part of the problem is the attention that is also required for us to experience the world. So when we experience the world, one of the things that is needed is idea of attention. You find this in the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 28. You find that you have to kind of attend to something. So for example, the eye can be here, the object can be there, but because I don't pay attention, I don't actually see it. For example, you are listening to some music, and all you hear is the music, even though something passes in front of your eyes, you don't actually see it because you're so engrossed in the music. So you also need to pay attention to what is going on. And whenever we pay attention, attention is driven by our past conditioning. Attention is never neutral. Attention doesn't just happen like that. It happens because of our conditioning. And so if you have a certain conditioning, there are certain things that you tend to like, certain things that you relate to in a certain way, you will attend to those things. So if something is yours or something is important to you, you will tend to attend to those things that are important to you because they are yours, because you identify with them. So our attention is always biased by what is important to us, by what we like. It is biased by, for example, by craving. Yeah, we attend to things that are beautiful. There is a reason why I talked about those flowers and not the dead insect on the floor over here. Actually, there's no dead insect now, but the other day there was a dead insect over here. Actually, the dead insect was kind of fascinating. But anyway, you tend to the flowers, right? Because the flowers are kind of more attractive or whatever. So we are always, the way we attend to the world is already biased. And because bias is built into how we attend to the world, then the foundation for all of the papancha is built into our attention. How we attend to the world, the papancha is already almost built into that. Because we attend according to our biases. And so now you can start to see the solution to the problem. Yeah? Because our attention is like biased. Our attention is distorted. Our attention is the result of our past lives, our past conditioning, and all of these kind of things. What we have to do is we have to do something with our attention. We have to attend differently. And the way to do that is to develop our perceptions. When you develop your perception, your attention changes. You look at things in a new way. So when you develop the perception of impermanence, you start to look at things in the world in a new way. Your attention engages with the world through that new perception that you are developing. And this is really how our whole thing changes, because then we attend to the world differently. We perceive the flower, but because our attention is different, we don't proliferate so much anymore. We don't tend to think of it so much as mine, because we understand it is impermanent. We don't take it so much as a sense of self, because we realize that many of the things that we have looked at before, they are empty processes. They are things that happen on their own. There is no sense of self there. You don't see it in these ways because you have contemplated your khandhas through meditation, etc., etc. And so we are changing our perceptions, and this actually influences this whole process. And then the papancha starts to die down. There's less proliferation, and there is more mindfulness, and there's more clarity in the mind as a consequence of all of that. And ultimately, those perceptions are not just a development of perception, but ultimately they aim at real insight. And when you have real insight, finally, it cuts off the very source of proliferation. The very source is the false sense of self. And when the false sense of self goes, it disappears, then papancha is eliminated once and for all. There's no more craving, there's no more asmimana, no more conceit, no more views in terms of the views that we talk about on the Buddhist path. So this is why the development of perception is important. This is one of the reasons, because it allows us to engage with the world in a more constructive way. It reduces papancha. It reduces all the sense of mine and me and I am, and all the tendency to think endlessly about these things. So developing perceptions leads to right view. Right view leads us to engage with everything in the world in a more skillful way. When you meditate, you become peaceful more quickly. When you live in the world, you tend to be more kind and more forgiving. All of these things arise from this. So that is the basic idea. And then they have the same idea for the other senses. Eye consciousness arises dependent on the ear and sounds. Nose consciousness arises depending on nose and smells. Tongue consciousness arises dependent on the tongue and tastes. Body consciousness arises dependent on the body and touches. Mind consciousness arises dependent on the mind and ideas, or mental objects. Not sure if ideas fully captures things. If you are in a jhana state, I'm not sure if that can be called an idea, but it is certainly a mental object. The meeting of the three is called contact or experience. Contact is a condition for feeling. You contact, you experience the world, feeling comes with it. I've just been discussing this, and this is just recapitulating again. And whatever you whenever you feel something, you perceive it as well. And then when you perceive things, you start thinking about it. And because of these underlying senses of craving and conceit and views, then you proliferate. You think about it. This is mine. I want this. I don't want that. This is my view, etc. And you kind of go on like this. And what you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with respect to ideas known by the mind in the past, future, and present. So that is the basic idea of the sutta. So you can see it is not too complicated. Once you get the idea, it's not difficult to understand. It's just that the way it is expressed, words are always complicated. Once you try to, a simple mental experience can become very complicated once you try to write it down in words, because words are not often very suited to explain simple experiences. Anyway, so let's carry on. Where there is the I, sight and eye consciousness, it will be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is evidence of contact or experience, it is possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there is evidence of feeling, it will be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there is evidence of perception, it will be possible to discover evidence of thought. When there is evidence of thought, it will be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. And then the same thing for the other five senses. So it should be said, however, that this is true, but it's only true for the Puthujjana and to some extent the Sekas. The Sekas are the Aryas who are not Arahants yet. For the Puthujjana, this is certainly the case. This is exactly what happens. For the non-Arahants, the other Aryas, it is also to some extent true, because they still have a sense of mind to some extent. But for the Arahant, this is no longer true. For the Arahant, there is I, there is sight, there is eye consciousness, there is contact, there is feeling, there is perception, there may even be thought, but there is no papancha. Papancha has come to an end. And this is kind of what is missing in the sutta. This is what kind of makes the sutta slightly unusual. It doesn't really talk about the arahant. It talks about the ordinary person, and then it talks about the ending of everything at the other end. So it's a little bit as if something is kind of missing. So you have to fill in the gaps there, what it means to be an arahant. Arahant is nippapancha. Nippapancha means no papancha. So then you have the same problem with all the six senses, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, and it's possible to discover contact, and then you will have feeling, you will have perception, and you will have proliferation, the papancha. And then comes the reverse. When there is no eye, no sight, and no eye consciousness, it will not be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is no evidence of contact, it will not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there is no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So, this is kind of obvious, If you don't have any of the senses, then the whole perceptual process is gone. You cannot perceive anything anymore. And so, in Buddhism, we try to end the perceptual process because the idea of papancha is basically painful. Yeah, the mind always running around, doing all kind of things, worrying, being concerned about things, being anxious, trying to sort these things out, trying to own the things that cannot be owned, trying to find a self that doesn't exist in the first place. All of this is a painful process, and so you want to make the process come to an end. And this is really what Buddhism is about. Ending dukkha, this is what this really shows right here. And in the middle here, as I said, which is not really mentioned, is the arahant, is in the middle. For the arahant there is no papancha, but the process has not yet come to an end. There's still the seeing, etc. So, then the same thing is true for all the other five senses, and then that is how it is not possible to discover any evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. And then Venerable Mahakachana, he says, this is how I understand the detailed meaning of the brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer. Then those mendicants, and approving and agreeing with what Venerable Mahakachana said, rose from their seats and went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened, adding, Mahakachana clearly explained the meaning to us in this manner with these words and phrases. And the Buddha replies, Mahakachana is astute, mendicants. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked this question, I would answer in exactly the same way as Mahakachana. This is what it means, and that is how you should remember it. This is kind of one of the characteristics of the Buddha. He always very supportive of the senior monastics in his community. Yeah, because especially if they are arahants, obviously they know what they're talking about. When he said this, Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, Sir, suppose a person was weak with hunger, was to obtain a honey cake. Wherever they taste it, they would enjoy a sweet, delicious flavor. In the same way, wherever a sincere, capable mendicant may examine with wisdom the meaning of this exposition of the teaching, they would only gain joy and clarity. Sir, what is the name of this exposition of the teaching? Well then, Ananda, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the honey cake discourse, the Madhu Pindika Sutta. Madhu is honey. You have this in Sinhala as well, is that Madhu is honey? Yeah. Pindika, like bit, morsel, and then Sutta. So that is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda was happy with what the Buddha said. So that is the Madhu Pindika Sutta, and it's quite a brief overview of what is, in many ways, we could have gone into much more detail about this sutta, but the point here, this is just meant as a background for understanding the idea of how perceptions arise, how the mind works from one particular point of view, and so I don't want to spend too much time on it. If you really want to understand these ideas in more depth, I would recommend to read a book like Concept and Reality by Venerable Kadugannawa, where he goes into these things in much more detail. However, you have to be a little bit philosophically inclined. He's a quite philosophical person, Venerable Nyanananda, so if you're not so philosophically inclined, it may not be the right thing for you. But I think what I've been saying now is plenty enough to give you an idea of how this works and a feeling for how the perceptual process works and why it can be so problematic and where we can rectify things by changing the way we attend to the world through developing our perceptions and seeing things in a different way. So there you are. That is that sutta, and I can see I'm going a little bit faster now because I want to cover some of the interesting topics later on. So let's go on to the next one. And this is the Vipallasa Sutta, and it just fills in some of the gaps of the previous sutta. And the Vipallasa means like distortion or perversion. It's a distortion of the mind not seeing things as they actually are. Mendicants, there are these 4 perversions of perceptions, mind, and view. What for? Taking impermanence as permanence, taking suffering as happiness, taking not self as self, taking ugliness as beauty. These are the 4 perversions of perception, mind, and view. So, again, as we have just seen, the problem in life is that we don't see things as they actually are. We see things in a distorted way. We come into this world. Our mind is already distorted when you get born into this world. This is the idea of Vipallasa. And the mind here has like many aspects to it. And the Buddha normally divides the mind into 3 aspects: views, thoughts, and perceptions. And views are ditti, thoughts here are citta, and perceptions are sanya. These are kind of 3 aspects of the mind. And there are 3 aspects you can kind of distinguish quite easily. A view is something that you think about. It is something that is considered. I view things in this way. I view the self to be permanent, whatever. If you ask someone what their view is, they will tell you what it is. Thoughts are more kind of, they are just the verbalization of the mind. Some people don't verbalize, but then maybe the pictures in the mind or whatever. This is how the thinking mind works. And perceptions are more immediate. They are how we know the world, right? Straight away. You know them, as I mentioned before. I already discussed the 5 khandhas a little bit. These are 3 aspects fairly distinguishable in the mind. And this covers really the idea, this covers the entire mental landscape, the diversity of mind is covered really by these 3 terms. And in all of these cases, there is a distortion. Now, these 3 things, they also relate to each other. I know Ajahn Brahm, he often talks about this, how the distortion, and this is actually not found in the suttas, but it's found in the commentaries, but it is kind of accepted by many people as being how the mind works. And this is the idea that when you have a view about things, that view will influence how you perceive the world. So you come into you have a view that these are my glasses, so when I see them, straight away I feel attachment or whatever. There's a perception of mine because I have a view that this is mine. If you ask me, I will say it is mine. And then because I have the perception that they are mine, I will think about them according to that. And that thinking will then reinforce the view. So view gives rise to perception, perception gives rise to thought, thoughts give rise to views, views to perceptions. And so we are trapped in this loop. The mind, all the various aspects of mind are interrelated, reinforcing each other. And it's very hard to see a way out of that. And of course, the way out is you have to start developing the perceptions, etc. And eventually you break out anyway. So we are trapped in this with a biased mind, and all the aspects of mind are biased in this way. And so what are these biases of the mind? And this is what this next thing is about. You can say, of course, that the mind is biased in many different kinds of ways. There isn't really any limit to the kinds of biases that we have. But these are the biases that are important for the spiritual path, for arriving at some kind of freedom. These are the biases we need to consider. And so this is the tendency to take things that are impermanent as permanent. Things that are unreliable, we think of them as reliable. Things that we think we can rely on, actually we can't rely on them. And this is a very deep-seated thing. And sometimes you may think that actually, no, I understand impermanence because it's kind of obvious. Things are always changing. But very often that understanding is very shallow. It's superficial. It doesn't really go deep. As soon as you forget that simple contemplation, you start taking things as permanent again. How can you know that whether you take things as permanent or impermanent? It's almost hard to know. If I ask you, you probably say, oh, I know it's not permanent. Yeah, you will have that feeling that it's not permanent. But when you see how you react to the world, that reaction tells you that you're still thinking of things as permanent. If you watch the news on TV and you see the war coming out in Ukraine, what do you say? Do you say, oh no, that's terrible, war in Ukraine or in the Middle East, or even worse, if it is here in Sri Lanka, you had the kind of the things going on here for a long time, very close to home. So when a war breaks out, what do you think? Do you think, oh no, there's a war? Most people think that, right? Oh no, it's a war. But the person who understands impermanence thinks, oh yeah, of course, it's impermanent. Yeah, of course you can expect a war. Maybe they wouldn't be so blasé about it, but maybe they would not. They would kind of shrug their shoulders. Of course, the wars happen. That's how you know that you're seeing things in terms of permanence. You don't expect the change. Yeah, this is how you know something is wrong. Or something is stolen from you, something is taken from you. Do you think, oh yeah, I expected it to get stolen? Yeah, tomorrow morning, Palita, your car is gone. Do you say, oh yeah, of course, car is gone. Yeah, sure. That's what happens. Yeah, cars go, cars come, cars go. Probably not. Probably you won't be too happy if your car is gone, right? And that is because you have a perception, some idea of permanence. You don't really fully understand the idea of how unreliable things are. So this is how you actually know whether you take things to be permanent or not. Often, if it's just on the idea level, we think we understand, but emotionally we haven't really understood. We still hold on to these things. So the bias is still there. The vipallasa is still deeply rooted in our heart and in our mind somehow. Taking suffering as happiness. With things we take as happiness in the world actually turn out to be problematic. Like ownership. Ownership is the classic thing that we take as happiness. We own things. And part of that ownership is like relationships with other people. To some extent, we own those relationships. We feel that we are, we own the other person that we are in a relationship with. And then all the ownership of all the things in our life. We take these things to be happiness. And we forget that every time you are attached to things, you are really asking for suffering. Attachment must always lead to suffering. And there are some really beautiful and simple suttas about this that kind of really bring this out very nicely. And one of those suttas is the Piyajatika Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 87, I think. Piyajatika, born from those who are dear. And the Buddha kind of makes a very powerful statement, how suffering is born from those who are dear to us. Piya, dear, the loved ones, right? Jatika, born from. And that's kind of very powerful. It's a very simple sutta, but it expresses this idea in a very powerful way. And it goes very counter to how we tend to think about life. Then we have the idea of taking not self as self. We tend to think of things that are not self as being you. And this is quite profound, and quite deep. But the way to deal with this is really when you when you feel the fear in meditation, you feel that you don't want to go any further, you are frightened. That is usually when you take not self as self. That's why you have that fear in meditation. You can see it right there. So I'm trying to show you how these things are, giving you practical examples so you can understand what is going on here. Yeah, this is really what this is about. Taking ugliness as beauty. This is like for example the body. Yeah, we look at the human body, we think of it as beautiful, but we haven't really looked at it very carefully. The human body is, as I mentioned the other day, you take the skin away. The skin is only a tiny little thing on the outside, and then the human body is suddenly transformed into something that is not very attractive anymore. So it depends on the perspective you take. And, the beauty there is really largely based on an illusion. It's a vipallasa, it's a distortion of the mind. We're not looking at it in a neutral way. We come into the world with a bias. We want to see the body as beautiful. That's what we want to do. And because we want to do that, that is what we do. We look for those parts of the body that confirm our bias. And we don't look for those aspects which are counter to the bias that we have. And this is how then you develop your perceptions to get out of these things. So these are the idea of vipallasa. And the reason I talk about these vipallasas now is because they tie in very closely with the previous sutta. The previous sutta, when we attend to the world, when we contact the world, when we experience the world, we experience it through these vipallasas. These distortions are part of our attention. We attend in this way, and that's why we have a problem. And again, now you can start to see the contours, the idea of where the solution is to be found. The solution is to reprogram our mind, to learn to see things differently, gradually turning around the supertanker, making it face in a different direction. This is kind of the idea here. So, then there are the 4 correct perceptions, the non-vipallasas of perception, mind, or view. What are the 4? Taking impermanence as impermanence, taking suffering as suffering, taking not self as not self, taking ugliness as ugliness. So these are the right perception, seeing things according to the Dhamma, the way Yata Buddha Jnana Dassana. This is what Yata Buddha Jnana Dassana is. It comes after samadhi, when the mind is peaceful and ready. And there are these 4 corrections of perception, mind, and view. So that is the background for the development of perceptions. It gives you like a framework and how to think about the idea of perception. And so now what we want to do is we want to start to consider how we can develop and change our perceptions, so we can undermine the vipallasa, we can undermine the papancha, and start to see the world in the right way. And that will reinforce largely the first factor on the Noble Eightfold Path, samaditthi. Samaditthi will get stronger. One of the really important things in Buddhism, and that we often kind of misunderstand, is that samaditthi is not kind of yes, I have it, or I haven't got it. Samaditthi comes in many different degrees. And the more you develop your perceptions in line with the Dhamma, the closer your view will be with the real samaditthi. So it is like you are purifying it, making it more right, until one day you gain the final insight, and that is the true samaditthi that you get. So it is a gradual movement. Sometimes you ask people, have you got right view? And they say, yes, I believe in rebirth, so I must have right view. But it's not as simple as that. Yes, okay, that is good. It's a good starting point. It is good to start with that. Certainly, if you don't believe in rebirth, you've got a very serious problem. But if you do believe in rebirth, that's just the beginning. What are the consequences of believing in rebirth? And a lot of those consequences overlap with these kind of vipallasas here. Once you start to understand rebirth, you understand more about dukkha, more about impermanence, more about non-self. So these are all interrelated things. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the true meaning of these right views? How do we develop them? How do we cultivate them? How do we get closer to make them really powerful, motivating factors on the spiritual path, things that drive us on the spiritual path? As human beings, we are driven by emotions most of the time. Emotions are what propel us. We feel something feels good, feels right, then we do it. Ideas don't have much power on us. Ideas are useful. People can believe in rebirth and do nothing, just sit in an armchair and smoke all day, right? And that's not going to be very helpful for you. So it has to actually do something emotionally. You feel a little bit of fear maybe. Wait a minute, this rebirth business, actually, it is worrying, it is kind of scary, and that is an emotion, and that will drive you on the path. And this is why having this right view is important, to become an emotional driver, a motivating factor in our practice. So this is what we will try to uncover, how to make these motivating factors on the path. That a kind of right view that is not just right view, but actually does something to us. So we're coming to the end of this session, but maybe let's get started very, very simply with the next sutta, because at least we get the introduction going, and that will we can get into the real details of it when we come back. So this is the well-known Arya Pariyesana Sutta. Pariyesana means to search, and Arya is the noble, it's a noble search. And just the title is really nice. The noble search, the noble quest. It's like the noble person looking for what is truly worthwhile in the world. There's something very, very kind of tantalizing and powerful about that very idea of the noble search. And really all of us here, we are on that noble search to a greater or lesser degree here. And the background story to this particular sutta is that the Buddha is out bathing. He has taking a bath somewhere. He's with Venerable Ananda, and then Venerable Ananda says, "Please come and give a Dhamma talk to the monks. They are at this particular hermitage." And then the Buddha goes there, and he knocks on the door, and they let him in. It's all very interesting how that whole process happens when he comes there, and the Buddha waits outside. He waits outside until the monks are finished talking inside. It's kind of the Buddha just isn't, well, I'm the Buddha, so I can just walk in. No, he doesn't. He actually is polite. He acts like ordinary people in society. It seems very ordinary, right? It's nothing supernatural. He doesn't kind of fly through the window or anything like that. It's very ordinary. And it's kind of beautiful that it's ordinary. It's down to earth. So he stands outside the door, and then when he hears that they have finished the conversation inside, he knocks on the door. And then when he knocks on the door, the monks on the inside, they come and they open the door. And they say, "Oh, Venerable Sir, please come in." And then he comes in, and then he sits down, and then he asks them, "What are you talking about?" And then they tell him that they were actually talking about the Buddha himself and about his, his qualities and these things. And then the Buddha replies as follows. He says, "Good, mendicants. It is appropriate for gentlemen like you, who have gone forth in faith from lay life to homelessness, to sit together and talk about the Dhamma. When you are sitting together, you should do one of two things. Discuss the teaching, Dhamma Sakacha, or Dhamma, I'm not sure what it is here, Dhamma Kateti maybe something, probably Dhamma Sakacha, or keep noble silence." So this is the background here, and this gives you a very high ideal as a monastics. You discuss the Dhamma, or you kind of keep silent. In other words, there isn't that much to really be talked about. And this is what we saw also in the Kosambhya Sutta, no, not Kosambhya, in the Upakilesa Sutta, the same kind of idea with the three monks living together, living in this way. And then the Buddha says, "Mendicants, there are these two quests, or two searches, the noble quest and the ignoble quest." And so you can obviously imagine already which one is which and what is going on here. But there are these two quests. And so what we're going to talk about now is the idea of the noble quest, how to search in the world for that which is really worthwhile, and how to do that in the right way, to make it a noble search for noble qualities and noble things. And that will come this afternoon at 4 o'clock. So if you want to be a noble person searching for noble things, come this afternoon. If you want to carry on with ignobility, do not come this afternoon. That is my challenge to you. So Anyway, please carry on enjoying yourself. Have a nice lunch, and we'll see you again later this afternoon here.